Hello and welcome to another short mini lecture for your economics course. This particular lecture is going to go over how to calculate out the labor force unemployment rates and labor force participation rate, as well as briefly explain what each of these mean as we go along. Now, at any point in time, feel free to pause the screen or pause the video as we go along and calculate the problems out yourself. Make sure that you understand it, because you are going to have similar problems on the exam. Alright, so the problem that you see on your screen states in July of 2021, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or BLS, reported 156,700 people employed and 8,200 people unemployed in the Lubbock Metro Statistical Area, or MSA. There were approximately 255,000 people aged 16 and over. Number 1, calculate the following for Lubbock MSA in July of 2021. A, the labor force, B, the unemployment rate, and C, the labor force participation rate. So we're going to start off with the labor force. That's actually going to give us the foundation, and then unemployment rate and labor force participation rate will actually build on that particular finding. So what is the labor force? Well, labor force literally means, the equation is labor force equals unemployed plus the amount of people that are employed. So it literally means the amount of people that want to actively work, right? If you're working right now, we assume that you want to work because you're actively working. And if you're unemployed, officially unemployed, what that means is you're actively trying to find work. Now, when we talk about the official unemployed, we're not talking about people that choose not to work. And that's a misconception that a lot of people have. It's just not people that are choosing not to work. It's the people that are choosing to work, but they can't find a job or haven't found a job for whatever reason. So, for example, we wouldn't include people that are retired. We wouldn't include stay-at-home parents or students that choose not to work while in college or high school, etc. We wouldn't also include disabled workers, things like that. So, our labor force for this particular equation, and this is supposed to be a plus sign, is 8,200. We sub that in, that variable up here, the amount of people unemployed, plus the amount of people that are employed. So plus 156,700 get you, if my math is correct, 164,900. So that's my labor force. That's the amount of people that are in the labor force. I'm going to try to write this as nice as possible. My handwriting is not the best, as you can tell. 164,900. So that represents our labor force. So next we can actually calculate out the amount of people. I'm going to go ahead and erase what I have on the screen right now. The amount of people that are unemployed based off the labor force, or unemployment rate. That percentage, essentially. This gives us an idea in this one snapshot of the amount of people based off of the amount of people that want to work, the amount of people that are not currently working that want to work, right? That I'll explain it a little bit more. So the unemployment rate formula is, off of the eraser, unemployment rate equals our unemployed, so this is the amount of people that are unemployed, I'm going to write it, divided by our labor force times 100%. Like I said, my handwriting is not the best, I apologize, especially when I do equal signs for some reason. So you would just sub in 8,200, that's the amount of people that are wanting to work, but not currently working, divided by your labor force. Now be very careful here. Students occasionally want to divide this by the employed times 100%, which would equal, and I'm going to go ahead and put it down here. Alright, which would equal, let me do the math real quickly earlier, but hey, we can do it all at the same time. I got 5.0%. PIN is very, there we go, 5.0%. That's the official unemployment rate. Now, on the exam, I want you to round to the nearest 10th, unless I say otherwise, it'd be the nearest 100th. I promise you that the multiple choice true false questions are not going to be tricky, where there's one that's really close, and just based off of how you rounded, you'll get it incorrect. There will be problems that if you sub in the wrong numbers, yes, you're going to get the wrong answer. However, you shouldn't be tricky just rounding. So 5.0%. In fact, if you were to go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, their website, you would find that that's the actual unemployment rate. That was for July of 2021. So I'm going to go ahead and write that up here. Once again, hopefully my handwriting is nice. My time, 5.0%. All right. Now the last thing we need to do is calculate out the labor force participation rate. So how do I do that? Well, the formula for the labor force participation rate, I'm going to write it as LFPR equals the labor force, so that finding we found in 1A, labor force, 164,900 people. We're going to use it again, divided by our population, 16 and over, times 100%. I'm going to erase that, make it nice and neat again. Like I said, I apologize. Hopefully my handwriting is about as good as Texas Tech. There you go. That's a joke. Evergreen. All right. So labor force divided by the population, 16 times. So that whole thing times 100%. You just sub in your variables here. So you have labor force, 164,900 divided by, and this is where we use our population, 16 and over. And that's an estimate based off of census data. It's probably not 100% exact, and it hasn't been updated with the newest census. So it's just estimate 255,000 times 100%, and you get 64.7%. That's what I got. 64.7%. So that's our answer for C. What does that mean? Well, to be honest with you, it's probably overestimating, because I believe the population is probably more based off the newest census. However, it's close to that, 64.7%. What that means is the amount of people that could work. What is the percentage of people that are actually working out of that? Now, or participating, not necessarily actually working, just wanting to work out of that. Why is it 16 and over? Well, quite a while ago, the legal age for working was changed from 14 to 16 because of labor laws. You'll learn that in your government classes. Don't need to really know that here. What you do need to know is 16 is the legal age to work, and this represents the amount of people that could legally work and how many people are participating in our workforce. Obviously, we don't want this to be 100%. People that say that this should be 100% are crazy. That would be like a communist country where you dictate that every single person works, whether they're in high school or whether they're retired. We don't want that to happen. In fact, a 65 to 70% participation rate is actually pretty good. We want people to be in college, school. We want people to be retired. We expect that. The problem comes when that participation rate falls. And we saw that back in the early parts of the pandemic. It started falling. People started pulling themselves out of the labor force, whether they were scared of the pandemic itself and coronavirus, or for all different reasons. They just pulled themselves out of the labor force, decided not to actively look for a job. Well, that tells us a lot, right? Now, back in 2008, during the Great Recession through 2010, we actually saw the labor force participation rate drop substantially. And what happened then is there weren't jobs available, and so people became discouraged, which is another term you're going to learn about in your textbook this week, in the chapter this particular week. What happened is they can be discouraged. They stopped looking for a job, so they essentially pulled themselves out of the labor force, and that participation rate started falling. And when the economy is good, we expect it to go up. We don't want to ever see it below 50%. That would be quasi-socialist country or leaning towards socialism. Some of those countries in Europe where you have governmental benefits from 50 and over, and you tend to have really high taxes because we have more of a free market system. We want closer to 65%, 60 to 65%. With an aging population also, we expect it to start dropping over time because there's more and more people retired. And you also have to think about it. The people that are actively working are helping to support those that are not actively working. So that can become, that was just a brief explanation. Hopefully this helps you understand how to calculate out each of the variables, equations. If you have any questions, please contact me. And as always, go Broncos.